Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Christina Welter, and we are here today with Dr. Barney Turnock. We are going to spend a few minutes interviewing Dr. Turnock on the history and the current state of performance management in public health. This is for the DRPH class IPHS 594, and this is the first time this course is being offered, and so we wanted to talk to the expert here on performance management in public health. So we're going to spend about 10 to 15 minutes here talking about the history of performance management, pre-1988 report, IOM report, post-1988 IOM report, and then we'll spend another segment talking about Dr. Turnock's opinion of where we are today. So if you could provide us an overview in 5 minutes or less of your public health history of performance management before 1988 IOM report.
Well, I'll try. To me, the history of performance management in public health goes back far beyond 1988. I like to view it as actually going back to maybe 1850, when Lemuel Shattuck laid out a blueprint for state and local public health services for Massachusetts. Although I think Shattuck didn't have a clear idea that he was talking about performance management, he was talking about important activities of public health that had a positive impact on population health. And to me, that's the generation of performance management, and I would trace it even further back into the early 1900s, when Charles Chapin was asked by the American Medical Association to do a survey of state public health activities and to determine the kinds of things they were doing so that judgments could be made about whether those things were affecting the health of the public in the various states of the U.S. at the time. Chapin did a very thorough cataloging of activities and concluded that a lot of what state and local health agencies were doing at the time didn't contribute much to the health of the public, and that there were a lot of things that they could do if they acted more consistently that would have a more positive impact. And I think this thread continued through the 20s and 30s and 40s under the auspices of the American Public Health Association and their Committee on Administrative Practices. I think it had various names over those decades, but it's something that came to be known as the Emerson Report, and the Emerson Committee was a very detailed plan for the development across all states at the time of a consistent level of local public health protection supported by state health agencies. And the various mechanisms and tools that the Emerson Committee used really became the standards of practice at the time. And so I view this as performance management again, where the important activities of state and local public health practice that are believed to have an impact on people's health are promoted and are assessed in terms of which are most valuable, most important, most supportable at the local level. And so to me, the history of performance management is one that goes back more than the 25 years since the IOM report. It goes back well over a century, and has led us to where the IOM picked up the pieces in 1988 and moved us ahead.
And so share a little bit about that. What did the 1988 report say specifically about performance management or measurement, or what did it hint toward, and then what happened after that?
Well, I think what happened with the IOM report was they began to fill in the unknown, the black box. I think prior to that time, public health was pretty much described by the kinds of things that took place, the kinds of services that were offered. Clearly those things were intended to have an impact on people's health, but there wasn't much of an understanding about how that really occurred. And the IOM, in its formulation or reformulation of public health, attempted to outline some of those broad concepts that are involved, kind of the black box, the processes that are important that contribute to those outcomes, and to lay them out in a way in which they could be consistently implemented and then assessments could be made as to which of those things were in fact most important, which really lined up with improved health status, so that health agencies could begin to do more of those things that had a positive impact and less of the other stuff that didn't. And so the IOM report really fleshed out that skeleton and made the bridge between the inputs and the outputs of the public health system by describing the processes. And that was really the foundation for looking at the relationships between the infrastructure inputs and what they do, the processes, and the outputs, the services, and the kind of impacts they have on population health and communities. And so the IOM really provided the missing link.
IOM report said that public health was in disarray. Can you say a little bit more about that and sort of why that also was an impetus for the description of the infrastructure toward then improvement in health?
Well, I was around at the time, so I'm not quite sure public health was in more disarray then than it is today. But I think what they meant was basically that that there wasn't a clear vision of what the goals of the system were, and how those goals would be achieved through a very expansive network of many players in the governmental sector and their partners in the voluntary and private sector. And so I think the disarray that they saw at the time was something that had really always existed, probably exists to a great extent today, in terms of lining up the resources that are available to impact people's health, and so that they'll have the maximum effect. But I think the disarray was probably more of a way to draw attention to the situation and their recommendations than it was an indictment of public health at that particular point in time. Mm-hmm. And clearly that was a wake-up call. And I think the public health community saw it as such, and took advantage of that opportunity, plus I think some of the other opportunities in the 1990s to expand upon these concepts and develop a number of tools that were widely implemented by the national public health organizations to advance the efforts of measuring and improving public health practice at all levels. And so there's an important set of progeny that came out of the IOM report.
Can you talk about those a little bit more? The public health practices and then public health essential services was born shortly thereafter.
Yeah, it's almost like the Bible, the core functions begat the essential public health services and so on and so forth. But very clearly after the identification of assessment, policy development, and assurance, which are basically mom and pop apple pie, concepts that everybody can get behind, but which I think have a certain amount of clarity to them in terms of organizing principles. There were a series of tools that were developed. The first one, I think, was actually one that NACCHO, the National Association of County and City Health Officials, developed in terms of MAP, mobilizing action for planning. And MAP was a very rudimentary tool that attempted to engage especially local health departments in community health assessments and community health planning, but also to look at their own organizational capacity to carry out the kinds of things that they needed to do with their community partners. And it was very much based upon the IOM general principles and was widely adopted and adapted by local health departments in the early 1990s. That was also about the time when there was a serious effort to deal with health reform at the national level, and through the efforts of folks like Christine Gebbe and others, there was attention paid to better integrating public health activities with what was proposed for health reform at the time. And so some of these concepts that the IOM had advanced in 1988 got rethought and expanded and into what we now know as the 10 essential public health services, which was really an effort to further describe what we mean kind of behaviorally or in practice, or ways that could be measured for these abstract concepts of assessment, policy development, and assurance. And very soon thereafter, a number of other tools began to develop that were organized around these same principles. The next generation of MAP, or next generation of Apex PH, I think I did that backwards actually. I think
Apex was first.
Yeah, Apex was first, and MAP was second. And NACHO's efforts to develop an operational definition of a functional local health department. So very soon there was a whole set of concepts emerging that evolved as standards for local public health practice that trailed on the heels here of the IOM report.
The one big difference, and correct me if I'm wrong, before 1988 versus post-1988 is that, as you already said, that the pre-1988, a lot of the attempts to measurement were based on services. Sort of immunization, MCH, other types of services versus functions. And part of that had to do in part with the changing disease trends. And now we're much more into complex chronic diseases that are not easily solved, not entirely, but to a larger degree. I mean, is that one reason, and what might be some others?
Well, I think so. I think early on the things that were measured were the things that were visible. And so, I mean, that kind of involves two different concepts. I mean, one of the infrastructure concepts, you know, how much money do you spend and how many people are working in the field, and you know, how many health agencies do you have, and things like that. Those kinds of ingredients are concrete, and they can be counted, and so a lot of these early efforts focused on them. But then as responses began to be generated and programs and services were offered, then the focus also included the number of people that were served, the number of shots given, you know, the number of mothers visited by nurses, the number of sanitary inspections or restaurant inspections that were performed, and so a lot of the attention was on these easily quantifiable, concrete things that people could see, and so there wasn't an emphasis at that time on how or why those programs were generated, on what need were they, were they meeting, and so that was the black box that the IOM uncovered.
And then after, so we had, as you mentioned, Apex PH, which was an early sort of strategic or internal process, strategic planning tool. We developed public health essential services, which then turned into public health operational definition, which is a set of standards for health departments. We also had the National Public Health Performance Standards Program, which was the first set of measures, and there were originally like over 400, something, 430 maybe, for the system, the public health system. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Well, they were very much developed by, to correspond to the assessment, policy development, and assurance construct, and the 10 essential public health services. There were a set of standards that were organized around those 10 essential public health services that were meant to apply to local health agencies, to state health agencies, even to governing bodies of local health departments. So there were a set of kind of early preliminary standards, I think, that were addressed, and they were originally intended to serve a variety of purposes. One was self-improvement, where agencies could use these standards as a measuring stick against what they were doing and develop their own self-improvement plans. But CDC also had the intent at the time to use these for surveillance. I mean, to kind of determine, the level of public health activity that was being generated nationally and in the various states, so that higher level policy decisions might influence the extent to which everybody was practicing from the same hymnal, and so there were a variety of applications that were intended for the original public health performance practice standards, and it was even envisioned at the time that they might be used as a basis for some sort of accreditation program, where some external body would come in and examine a health agency for their compliance with these standards. And so the National Public Health Performance Standards were designed to serve a variety of different applications, all of which, collectively intended to improve public health practice.
So in the 90s, the last question here in this segment is during the 1990s, also GIPRA was instituted in 1993. And so what influence do you think, if any, that had on public health's push? Because if you said 1988, was sort of a political move to call the public health system in disarray, now we actually have governmental movement toward performance measurement.
Well, I think, GIPRA is a little hard to understand if you're not part of the federal establishment. As an outsider, my view was that GIPRA certainly instilled in the federal health agencies more of a focus on end results. And performance management is about using information to improve results. And whether you do it in public health or any other business, that's what performance measurement and performance management does. So it was good to have the federal agencies, especially CDC, involved themselves in a process that focused on using their information to improve their results. And I think it just made them a stronger partner along the way.
Great. Well, thank you.